Bienvenue à tout le monde. I'm Shauna Van Hregg, Professor of Law at McGill and coordinator of this year's Annie-MacDonald Langstaff workshop series. And it's a real honor and delight to welcome all of you to the university, to our Faculty of Law, and to our Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism. You may have noticed that the session is being recorded. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted throughout the session, and the chat function has been disabled as well throughout the event. We ask that you feel free, of course, to turn on your video. The session today is our fourth and final installment of this year's workshops named for Annie-MacDonald Langstaff. Annie-MacDonald Langstaff was the first woman to earn a law degree in Quebec. She did so as a single mother, and she graduated from McGill in 1914 with first-class honors. She wasn't permitted to write exams for the Quebec bar. Over the 6 decades, she worked as a legal assistant. Over that time, she continued her fight for women's equality, especially with respect to the right to vote. And eventually in 1941, women did gain admission to the Quebec bar. Annie-MacDonald Langstaff was posthumously admitted to the bar in 2006 and awarded the Medal of Honor from the Barreau de Québec, and that medal is housed at our faculty. The Annie-MacDonald Langstaff Workshop Series was launched in 1988 at McGill. As was the case in 2020-2021, McGill's Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism is the generous co-sponsor of the faculty's Annie-MacDonald Langstaff workshops this year. I'm really delighted about this collaboration, and I'm very grateful to the center's directors, Nandini Ramanujam and Frédéric Maigret. And in particular, I want to signal thanks right at the start to Sharon Webb at the center and to Elise Mallette, a fourth-year law student assistant, both of whom have provided remarkable support. And it's Sharon who is hosting this Zoom session. The collaboration with the Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism, combined with the central participation of doctoral candidates at our faculty, assures the strength and success of the workshops and is a very nice testament, I think, to Annie-MacDonald Langstaff herself. This brings me to the unique format of the workshops. Organized this year around the general theme of mothers-in-law, intergenerational dialogues on women and human rights, they take the form of conversations with women doctoral students at McGill's Faculty of Law who come from around the world. The workshops have been organized around sub-themes of finding voice, confronting violence, changing rules, and for today, caring for our world. Today's dialogue doubles as the faculty's annual Margot E. Halpenny Lecture, generously funded by friends and family of our alumna Margot Halpenny of the LL.B. class of 1976. We are very fortunate to have Sandrine Ampleman-Tremblay and Laura Baron-Mendoza as our 2 doctoral candidates. It is, of course, intentional on my part not to have mentioned yet the name of our guest speaker. I know her well, as do many of the people here today, and indeed think of her as a wonderful mother-in-law for the McGill Faculty of Law community. But I want to emphasize the intergenerational character of these workshops by inviting Sandrine to give the formal introduction. And after that, Laura and Sandrine will engage our special guest in dialogue for a little under an hour, leaving time between 2 and 2:30 for exchange with members of the audience. Encore bienvenue, welcome, and I'll turn over to Sandrine.
Thank you, Professor Van Praagh. Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everyone. I want to say, to start on behalf of Laura and myself, that we are especially honored to be facilitating today's workshop, featuring one of McGill's very own mothers-in-law. We will be hearing, as Professor Van Praagh said, from Professor Jane Glenn, who is a source of inspiration for both Laura and I, who are currently undertaking doctoral studies at McGill. I'll start by providing you with an overview of her career for those of you who don't already know her many accomplishments. And I hope you will see how Laura and I feel that she is such a source of inspiration. Jane Glenn, now retired from her position as Professor Emerita in McGill's Faculty of Law, was the first full woman law professor at McGill. Over a long career, Professor Glenn's scholarly interests included land use planning, agriculture, land tenure, access to housing, socio-economic rights, water rights, environment, and mixed jurisdiction in the Commonwealth Caribbean. As you can see, it is really tied to today's theme of caring with our world. In 1972, she was jointly appointed to the School of Urban Planning at McGill, and in 2001, she joined the McGill School of Environment as an associate member. She taught McGill's Barbados Fall Field Semester from 2003 to 2008 and was a visiting scholar at numerous universities around the world. She was also elected as associate member of the International Academy of Comparative Law in 1995 and served as a vice president for North America, Central America, and the Caribbean of the Union mondiale des agraristes universitaires. Prior to coming to McGill with her late husband and colleague H. Patrick Glenn, Professor Jen earned a BA with honors from Queen's, a LL.B. also for Queen's, and a doctorate in 1973 from Université de Strasbourg in France. As a law professor, she taught courses related to property law, land use planning, and international development to generations of McGill students. She also served as Associate Dean Academic and has been for decades and is still today an important role model and mentor to women students, scholar, and fellow professor. Professor Jane Glenn has kindly agreed to speak with us today, and as we met in preparation for this meeting, we came to know, in addition to a woman who had a very successful career, a funny and caring person to whom the title mother-in-law suits wonderfully. We hope that this brief dialogue will do justice to her kindness and her intelligence, and without further ado, I will let my colleague Laura start this dialogue. Laura, the floor is yours.
Merci Sandrine, thank you. Well, bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. I am really happy to start this dialogue by remembering the day we met you, Professor Glenn, a couple of months ago. And we know that you completed your Bachelor in History and Political Science in 1963. When we met you, you said that you entered this program for the usual reasons, whereas you entered law school for unusual reasons. So we would like to know what are these usual and unusual reasons that you refer to?
Well, I think the usual reasons which applied to my LL.B. are that I came from a family of people who had gone to university themselves, and I was in classes at high school where the students ambition was to go to university. And so it was just assumed. My sister went to university, so it was just assumed that I would go to university, and I didn't want to do anything else in any event. So that's why I went. As to why I went into law, I have to confess that it was almost Machiavellian on my part, because I had a chance to go to Pakistan as a World University Service of Canada scholar. They had summer programs that a designated person or people from the larger universities could be appointed to go on their traveling seminars. And I was from Queens, and they had one slot, and I worked very hard for the slot, and had a very good time in Pakistan. We went to India as well. I've never been I had never even flown in a plane before, let alone going that far. So I had to come, one of the conditions was that I had to come back to Queens, and I thought, okay, well, I had done political science in my undergrad. I thought, well, why not the law faculty? And so I applied to the law faculty, and I thought I'd just do the 1-year stint, but I liked it so much that I continued.
Well, and at Queen's, you were the only woman in your law class. So how was it to be the only woman in your law class at Queen's? Would you say it was a positive experience?
Oh, I think I was treated beautifully. There was nobody that was rude to me, and most people, we worked out a sort of modus vivendi. For instance, they always went out for beer. At that time, the beer parlors were separated. There was men only, or there was women and escorts. And so I didn't see any point in going to drink beer with them. In any event, I didn't drink beer. So, but at a certain point, they would announce that it was with their wives. I can't remember the word that they used, but it was a drinking party with, but in any event, I knew it was with their wives. So I knew that they would be going to the women's and escort section. So I went along with some of those. And then the pressure to go and drink beer with them became overwhelming, because they always went out for beer on Friday afternoon, and the spot that they went got colored television, but it was in the women's and escort section, so that I had to go. And I can remember the first time I went, the waiter said, well, I'm sorry, this is the women's and escort section. And I had to pipe up and say, oh, he's with me. And then the waiter turned to the next one and said, well, I'm sorry. And I typed up, well, he's with me too. And so we went on about 6 of them, and then they finally gave up. And so that became my Friday afternoon activity, so that they could watch color TV.
Okay, I'm sure Sandrine, you have another question about that.
Yeah, well, my law school experience was very different from this. I never had any experience with color television throughout my law degree. But one of the things that strikes me is that when I started my law degree, were more women than men. And I wanted to know how you react to seeing this change in law faculties throughout your career and still today.
Oh, I didn't particularly notice. I mean, I, as I say, I was treated very well. I was treated well by the faculty and by the students. I mean, I think after a certain point, they didn't even notice that I was a woman, or if they noticed, they didn't particularly care. I know we had a good time. And one thing that I do remember was there was a group of fellows from another university that had always sat on one side of the class, and the classroom was sort of a horseshoe shape, so that I sat on one side and they sat on the other side, and the professor was sort of in between, and I could see that these fellows were getting very anxious to send notes to each other. And so I would deliberately ask a question so that the professor had to turn and answer me and didn't have his eye on them, so that they had this sort of snowstorm of notes going back and forth, and then they were all satisfied. And I think that they sort of realized that we were getting along. So
Thank you for that. It's okay. Your article in Vancouver from 1966 to 67. The firm wall has often been critiqued for its attitude toward women. For example, in 2020, a Quebec study reported disparity in the progression between men and women practicing law in firms. We want to know, from your limited experience, does this resonate with what you lived and experienced?
Well, I can't say, because I didn't practice law, other than I just did the articles. And when I was called to the bar, we then went on and did graduate work. But I was treated very well. I was at a sort of middle-sized firm in Vancouver, and I was treated very well by my principal. He made sure that I got the proper experience, sort of preparing people for trial and whatever. I don't think I would ever have made a trial lawyer. I think I was more of a solicitor than a lawyer at heart. But everybody else treated me well. I can only remember one incident, and that was the lawyers and the articling students used to take coffee in one room, the boardroom, and the secretaries took coffee in a different room, so I think a room off the kitchen. And one of the lawyers said to me that he thought I would feel more comfortable if I went down and had coffee with the women. And I sort of thought about that, you know, how can I say something polite? And then I said, well, I think that they might feel particularly uncomfortable because they wouldn't want one of us down. And so that was the end of it, that little incident.
Thank you for that, Laura.
Yes, well, Professor Glenn, after articling, you went on to undertake your graduate studies in Strasbourg, and your area was international human rights law, which is really interesting because that's my area also of studies. And it would be nice to hear you talking about the motives, or what motivated you to pursue doctoral studies, and especially that area of law.
Well, these law faculties in France are divided between, at least at the graduate level, or you either do public law or you do private law. And as my husband wanted to do private law and I didn't really care, I did public law because we didn't want to be sitting in the same classroom together. And so I did this public law, and there was the European Institute of Human Rights there, and I had a very good supervisor, and so I did my thesis was in international human rights, but I didn't teach it because one of Canada's leading human rights lawyers was a member of the faculty, John Humphreys.
Okay.
So,
what was your thesis about?
It was about social and economic rights.
Okay.
The European Convention on Social and Economic Rights.
Okay.
I don't think anybody's read it.
Okay, to follow your involvement with social and economic rights, as I told in the introduction, you moved to urban planning and were jointly appointed with the School of Urban Planning. Firstly, was it an unplanned event? Because your first path doesn't seem to foreshow this kind of appointment. And secondly, how did this appointment influence your academic career?
Well, I went to, my first introduction to the School of Urban Planning was because it is located in the Faculty of Engineering, and there is the Faculty of Architecture, and they were creating a school. There's a School of Architecture, and they were creating a School of Urban Planning, which is sort of goes hand in hand with the school. It's similar to a School of Architecture, but it looks at the big picture. And so the dean asked me if I would go and sit on their committee, and I went and sat on their committee, and I really enjoyed what I was hearing and so on. And since I had moved to teaching property law, when the school was set up, I taught property law to the School of Urban Planning. It wasn't private property law, it would be sort of public property law, if you can put it that way. But it was very good, and I really liked the staff. I see one, David Brown, he's here. There he is. I see, he just waved at me. He's here today, and we had a wonderful colleague there, Jean Wolfe, and Jean became a really good friend, and the School of Urban Planning had with links with other schools of planning in Quebec, and they got wonderful travel money to go down and teach planning law to people in God, I forgot the name of David, help me out. What was the first planning school that we went to in Trinidad? And then we had other appointments, and I went with a fellow from UQAM to Costa Rica to help them organize a planning school. So it was really, really good fun. I mean, who can say no to that?
And while having an academic career, you were also raising a family, and we think this might have brought some specific challenges, especially since you were the only women at the faculty. Could you expand a bit on how it was to balance family and work?
Well, it was fine. I mean, I had not been able to find a very good play care or daycare institute, but and so I relied on people that I hired and so on. And sometimes there was a failure, and so I had to do something desperate. Sometimes my father was my normal backup, but if he couldn't back me up, then I couldn't think of anything to do but bring the kids to the faculty, and everybody was very nice. And what stands out in my mind was one time when my daughter was of Jolly Jumper's age, bringing her to the faculty and hooking her up outside the student affairs office. And I don't know how many people remember Alana Lederer, but she was a student affairs officer, and she was just absolutely superb. And so when I came back from teaching the class, I found that they had hung Shannon up in her Jolly Jumper, and they were sitting around drinking their morning coffee in the alleyway that she was hung up outside the door, and she was jumping around very happily, and they were all enjoying their morning coffee, watching her. It was sort of better than TV in any event. And the other memory that I have of this was that when I was associate dean, the kids were maybe 5 and 3. I had to bring them to the office once, and the dean was very accepting of them crawling around up and down the floors while I was interviewing students. I think the students thought maybe they'd get better treatment from someone that's taking care of their child at the same time. And when I went in to teach, my secretary took over the babysitting job, so it was fine. It worked out, I think. It gave my kids an experience. Maybe it convinced them to go to university.
Amazing, Laura.
Well, actually, Professor Glenn just answered the question I had in mind, but I just have to say that chapeau to all the mothers who study, work, and raise their kids. I think that what counts when having these overlapped roles is actually the support you get. So it's good to know that you had that support as you described it, Professor.
Do you think that we've spoke about your experience as a mother working and teaching? Do you think the challenge have changed throughout the years, of that it's staying the same today for people who are trying to balance work and family? Well,
I think my answer to the last question sort of indicates that there were sort of challenges when I had a family, and one of them was difficulties with daycare and so on and so forth. There wasn't maternity leave at the time, which I found didn't. I think I looked up the date, but I don't. But in any event, there wasn't maternity leave, and there was a limited daycare and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
Well, the Bertha Wilson was the first female justice appointed at the Supreme Court in Canada, and she gave a speech entitled "Will Women Judges Really Make a Difference?" In this speech, she spoke of expectations people had for her and of the role of women in the judiciary. So we would like to make a parallel between your career and Justice Wilson's thoughts. So were you the only woman? You were the only woman in your class and the first female faculty member at McGill. Based on that experience, the question is, do women in law or legal academia really make a difference?
Okay, this I think was the hardest question you asked me, and I went through very sort of multiple variations of my reply. And I'm not too sure that women in law make a difference, but or in the legal profession make a difference. But what I decided was that I think feisty women, so that's my category, feisty women make a difference. And I think Annie-MacDonald Langstaff herself was a feisty woman with lots of energy and a definite idea of what she wanted to do and was prevented from doing it, but she brought an issue to the fore. I think that I had to go to do graduate work. I had a scholarship from Queen's that was called the Marty Memorial Scholarship, and I really didn't know much about the Martys, but in response, looking at my CV, I Googled them, and I found that I would put them in the category of feisty women because, and so feisty women aren't also lawyers. They both graduated from Queen's, the two sisters, in the late 1800s. And they went on to have a distinguished career themselves in high school education at the administrative level as opposed to the teaching level. And then the person that I went to the Caribbean most with, Jean Wolfe, I've already mentioned her, and I think of myself as, quote, this might be her word, swanning around the Caribbean. So I just love to swan around with her. She was a lovely person to be with. And there are law faculty colleagues. One I would include is Alison Harbison-Young, who was named to, she clerked for Justice Esty at the Supreme Court of Canada. She was the first female dean at Queen's Law. She was later named to the bench and has become a member of the Ontario Court of Appeal in 2008. And I looked at the Ontario Court of Appeal site and I saw that it has 16 men and 12 women on it. So I think that there is differences being made. And then I think of closer to home, I think of my two daughters, my daughter-in-law, Shannon, and my daughter Shannon, and my daughter-in-law, Leanna. And I would put them into I would describe them as two very feisty ladies. They're nice each in their own way, but they are feisty. So I think that what the world needs is more feisty women as opposed to more women lawyers.
Thank you. That's a very nice way to put it. When we met, you told us you wanted to take this occasion to thank people you were especially grateful to throughout your career. And we wanted to know if you want to take a few moments to talk about these people and how they helped you throughout your academic career.
Okay, I can think of four people. Two were deans. One was John Brierley, John Durnford first, and then John Brierley. And the other was another was a colleague, Bill Foster. And the final one was Alana Lederer of the Jolly Jumper escapade. As for John Durnford, it was he who, since he was my first dean, he was the one that fought with the administration to make sure that I was treated fairly. For example, we wanted to find a category other than simply faculty lecturer, which was usually reserved to downtown lawyers. And it was a time of inflation, and the dean only had a particular amount of money for downtowners, but other proper professors, full professors, full-time professors were receiving cost of living increases. And he was fair. He was so fair that he dipped into his own faculty budget to provide me with the similar cost of living increases and so on. And he got sort of ticked off with them. So he changed my classification from part-time lecturer to full-time reduced load. And that made all the difference in the world. So he fought the administration. John Brierley was equally supportive, and I was absolutely surprised and honored when he asked me to be his associate dean. I thought that was showed a lot of it was totally unexpected. And I think I've already talked about taking advantage of that and using my office as a daycare center if I had to, and so on. And Ilana Lederer, I don't know how many people here remember her, but my God, she was delightful. And I've talked about hanging up Shannon and having them all watch her doing her jolly jumping.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And to conclude, what advice would you give to the next generation of women in the legal academia? Do we need to be something else than feisty?
I found that the only expression that came to my head when I was thinking about this one was a German one that we learned on our German sabbaticals, and it's Bleib am Ball. And I had to Google it. I don't do legal research anymore. I just Google and see what Google tells me. But Bleib am Ball, Google tells me means hang in there. So that would be my advice.
Okay, we'll try to do that. Laura, do you want to say something before we go to the Q&A?
Or actually, there's no other way to end this conversation but by saying hanging there. So thank you for those words. And the experiences as women studying law and working in law depends on multiple factors, either the period of time or context. But what I'm sure of is that each of us has had to face different obstacles that are usually linked to gender stereotypes and gender roles. And Professor Glenn, you broke those stereotypes and roles by being the first full-time woman law professor at McGill. And with that, you inspire us and teach us that there are no limits, so that we all can contribute to gender equality from where we are and with the work we do. So thank you enormously, Professor Glenn, for sharing these minutes with us. And thank you for the legacy that you are leaving us also. And Professor Van Praagh, I'm gonna leave you the floor now.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm sure you will all agree that you feel the way that Laura and Sandrine said that they felt first meeting with Jane Glenn and then preparing for today's conversation. That is, they said that they felt very inspired. And I think their questions, as you could hear, were all in a sense looking for advice. And I think, Jane, your recollections and experiences constitute that advice. So but we're not letting you go yet. You know, people who are here may indeed have some questions or even recollections or things to share with you. So we have some time to turn to them. So I will do that. And I see that your colleague and mine, Geneviève Sommier, will start us off. So Geneviève.
Thank you, Shauna. Hello, Jane. It's lovely to see you. For those, you've told us a lot of things about the past, and I wanted to just share that I was in your common law property class in 1988, and I remember it very well. It was a very stimulating class, which a lot of my colleagues at the time thought was terrifying, particularly, you know, the rule against perpetuities. But I remember, and I know that when I started teaching at the faculty, you were very much a model for me in the sense of always looking in control, in the sense that whether or not you felt confident about mastering the subject matter, it never showed. And so that gave me complete confidence in what you were teaching. And when I would read, we were using Mendes da Costa's huge brick textbook. And I always remember when I would read it, I would say, Professor Glenn explains this much better. And I always found that to be, you know, a very comforting thing to feel that that I was in good hands. And so I wanted to thank you publicly for that. But if I can ask you a question, I wonder whether over all the years that you taught, and with all of the changes, technological and otherwise, did you ever feel that you had to change the way that you approached teaching? And did you change the way that you approached teaching? Or was there always some, you know, basic way that you approached it that remained constant throughout the years?
Oh boy. You do ask difficult questions. I don't think I know that I didn't consciously make a change. I might have made a change now and then, but no, I think I tried to get in and get out of a classroom with my ego still intact. I mean, the students, and here I'm serious, the students at McGill we're lucky to have them. At least I was certainly lucky to have the ones that I had when I taught through the years. And you can, if they ask you a question, you can only do your best. And I think I can't think of any exceptions of people being polite with your response or polite to you in class. I can't. I think people listened and respected. I've now forgotten what the question was.
I think you answered it, Jane, and there are a number of other people waiting in line. So we will now turn to Joanne Poirier. Joanne.
Oh, I see you. Yes. Joanne has.
Hi, Jane. It's really lovely to see you. And I was in the same class as Geneviève in '88 in your class, and I will reveal a secret. I don't know if you remember this, but one metaphor you kept using, which I have kept in my mind, and I still use it actually in teaching, was the crispy rule and the mushy rule. And in teaching, this is really helpful. In scholarship, it's really helpful. In methodology, it's really helpful. And at the very end of class, on your desk one day you came and there was a brown bag. And in the brown bag, there was a coffee crisp. And the coffee crisp was from me. I don't think you ever knew that. And you know, the class laughed because we just loved the crispy rule, because common law property was so difficult. And when we could get our hands on managing the crispy rule, we, you know, particularly those of us who'd done civil law the year before, we thought that was very refreshing. And I just want to underline your fantastic sense of humor and humility. I think it comes through today, which for me has also been, I don't think that I manage it that well, but I find it extremely inspiring. So I want to thank you for that. I know there are other comments, so maybe I'll stop. I'll leave a question with you, Shauna. If ever there is time, then maybe you can just reuse it. I just wanted to know something about Trinidad. What brought you there? We understand there was a research project, but what was your impact, or what was the greatest challenge about working in Trinidad, or the greatest lesson you drew from working in Trinidad? But let's suspend it, see if there's need to answer this question or time. Thank you.
Is that okay, Jane? We'll hold on to that. That was a
Sure. I'm just thinking that David Brown is here.
Waiting. Yes. Oh.
And he knows more about Trinidad than I do. So, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be happy to jump
Sure.
on the line.
Why don't you jump in? Yes, okay. Please.
And that is that I was, first of all, in Jane Glenn's class in the Faculty of Law. In 1973, as an urban planning student. There were, I guess, about 12 of us who were sitting there very intimidated by all you lawyer types in the class. But strangely, it all worked out. And we just really had a great time, and we learned a lot. And then Jane did come over to be part-time at urban planning and really seemed to enjoy it as well. And we started, I think, Jane, in Belize, rather than Trinidad. And I remember some story about you jumping on a wrench to change a tire on the way down the Yucatan to get to Belize City, because we would fly to Cancun and then go down to Belize City. But it was exciting all of these years to have this chance to, Jane used the word swarm around Jean Wolfe, and I was swarming around both of them, Jean Wolfe and Jane Glenn. And we visited a lot of places, and we had a lot of fun and learned a whole bunch of stuff along the way. So I'm so happy to see you, Jane, after all these years, and it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane, back to you. Does that bring back some memories about Belize and changing tires in Trinidad?
Well, David's perfectly right that we honed our skills, as it were, in Belize, and that was a lovely experience. This was with Jean Wolfe as well. And then the Trinidad people wanted to set up a planning school, and so we went and advised them. What advice they needed from a lawyer, I don't know, but I hung around with David and Jean on that one too. And then we also managed the group of us, the planning people, to go to other places. So I went to Costa Rica. I don't know where David went, and this was the.
Well, went to a bunch of places, and one was Nicaragua, but also Costa Rica,
yeah,
and Haiti. In fact, we had a Ville de Développement group, and we were linking up Trinidad and Haiti and Costa Rica and Nicaragua with 4 university programs here in Montreal. And it was so exciting, because we would meet every year somewhere or other in the world to go over things. And sometimes in Montreal, and sometimes actually in Haiti. Yep.
Funded by CEDA.
Funded by CEDA, my wife tells me. Jeanette Lamontagne over here.
Hi, Jane.
Lovely, thank you. So next on my list is Angela Campbell. Angela.
Shauna. Hi, Jane. It's great to be here and so great to see you. Unlike Joanne and Geneviève and David, I wasn't your student, but you were one of the first people to welcome me and to be my mentor when I came almost 2 decades ago as a faculty member. And I remember, so in those days, we used to have coffee in the common room, which was great. And we got to go and read the paper when it existed as a physical object and have coffee together. And it was really quite nice. And I remember one morning dropping in after dropping my kids at the McGill daycare and kind of feeling sorry for myself because I was quite tired. At this point, I don't think I only had one. I was quite tired. And you asked me, what's up? And I said, exhausted and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And in your way that, in a way that just was so, how much I've come to know you and appreciate you and care so much for you, you kind of told me to smarten up. And you said, this job's not that hard. This is a charmed life. And you'll be fine. Publish one thing and then publish something else that you like, peer book review, something else. You'll get there. And you were so kind, but so firm and clear. And I guess I just wanted to thank you for that because the no nonsense, the no drama was so appreciated and exactly what I needed and feel is not so much around anymore, I have to say. So I just wanted to extend my gratitude to you for that. And I guess what I want to ask you though, is that were you doing the demonstration that Geneviève described when you told me that, in that this job is not that hard? Was that the kind of confidence, was it real or was it really for you not that hard? Because sometimes I still find it quite hard. Although I hear Jane's voice in my head to say, it'll be fine. It's a charmed life.
I think I probably I probably reacted the way my mother would have reacted, sort of just get on with it and do your best and so on. But I'm not too sure that my children were supposed to come to this event. I'm not too sure that they're here, but they could probably tell you all sorts of stories about that sort of thing. So I'm afraid I don't have an answer. It was a nice comment, though.
The answers probably change day to day as well and year to year. So next on my list, Kathy Walsh. Kathy.
Hello, Jane. It's great to see you. I wanted to remind you and share with everybody else the year I first met you, which was when I was visiting McGill. It was before I joined as a full-time member, and I was there for a year. I had a small child. I was a single parent, and I had rented an apartment, which I think we backed. I was just a street away from you and Patrick, and it was New City, needed daycare, needed support and all the rest of it. And in their inimitable, unassuming, generous, easy way, Patrick and Jane took care of me, including providing me with a babysitter in the form of their own child, who was in CEGEP at the time, who allowed me to have evenings out in Montreal, in this wonderful city. And that it was a lovely year, and your generosity and, as I say, ease.
And the children, your children survived.
My daughter survived very well. You did make the occasional remark about whether you weren't entirely confident with him as a babysitter, but I should be all right.
Okay.
And it's also, well, I won't go on because there are others waiting, but I was not aware of that WUSC fellowship or scholarship that you did immediately in undergraduate, going to Pakistan. And I think, you know, that it's and how you worked to get that. And I suppose that's early evidence of that feistiness, that intrepid personality.
Well, I think that it was more good luck than anything, but I was really, it was a very interesting trip. Yeah.
Thanks. Janet Milne.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to beam in from south of the border. I'm in Vermont, so it's a pleasure to join in this group. And I've known Jane for a number of years when we first worked together on a book project that ended up being somewhat tortuous, but Jane hung in there, and we had great adventures with vocabulary and grammar through the process, and have had a great friendship since. So thank you for that, Jane. I was really enamored by your concept of feisty women. And sometimes women who come on strong are perceived as being off-putting or not effective. And I was just wondering what you think the key elements of success are to be a feisty woman who's really effective in her feistiness. What are the personality characteristics or skills that you think make it work well?
Oh my God.
Sorry, Jane. You can just say, be just like me, because I think that works incredibly well.
Well, I would think that you have to be feisty with a smile. I don't think that you can be feisty with a frown. Feisty is just a way of saying, you know, speak up and, well, I don't know. That's an awful question, Janet.
Oh.
That's very hard for me to answer, but I think I'm looking at I see a few feisty men here, but I see a lot of feisty ladies. Which is a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think the smile is a great answer.
And maybe that sense of that whole community of people all illustrating different ways to do it. Thank you for the question and answer. Next, Colleen Shepherd. Colleen.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Jane. It's wonderful to see you. I miss our informal chats in Old Chancellor Day Hall since the pandemic. No, I just wanted to echo what Angela said about Jane as a colleague and the importance of the informal mentoring that I think she gave other women colleagues. And I recall as well when we went for lunch and I was pre-tenure and you giving me advice, just keep publishing a little bit every year, just keep it coming and then you'll be fine. And that was really helpful. And I think I didn't actually have those kinds of informal mentoring relationships with a lot of my male colleagues. And so I deeply appreciated your advice. So I don't really have a question. So I think I just wanted to take a moment to thank you and to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Oh, that's so nice. A compliment without a question. Doesn't get better than
that. Thank you, Colleen. And next, our colleague, Armand de Métrage.
Well, as I say, as a junior colleague, I just want to tell Jane what a presence she was. You know, she was already there and well established when I got there in 1976. She was very much a presence and somebody we looked up to. We looked up to. And I must say, the work she and Jean Wolfe did was also an inspiration. It was one of the first, I think, examples of full-scale interdisciplinary cooperation between law and another discipline. And it was very impressive. because I don't think many of us were into it at the time. So Jane, senior colleague, congratulations. Thank you very much for your leadership.
Thank you. I think you took very seriously, Ahma, what Jane said just before, that she appreciates the comments or compliments without the additional questions. But Jane, there might be some more questions for you. So thank you. Sharon tells me Stuart Gooding has a question. Yes.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm not from the field of law, so I feel like a bit of an interloper here. But I've known Jane since 1960, when we were both undergrads at Queen's University. And I can assure you that she was feisty and smiling even then. So she's had a long history of being both funny and feisty. I want to follow up the question about the international work that you did, Jane, because I think that is really important to build linkages between academic institutions in Canada and in other countries, as you and Jean Wolfe were doing and other people are doing. So this is a semi-political question, and you can duck it if you want. But do you think that the Canadian government is doing enough these days to support those kind of academic linkages between universities like McGill and Queen's and universities in other countries?
Well, I see Janet Milne here. I've regretted that the program that afforded our twinning with Janet Milne with the University of Vermont Law School has ended. And that was, it used to be a very modest program that was run out of the various consulates around Canadian consulates around the world. And so they just dipped into a bit of money here and there and would have a bit of money for the Vermont Law School, for example, to invite us down for seminars or to come back up and visit Canada. And so it was the backing and forthing of that. And that program was axed by Stephen Harper, if I can get political about it. And it hasn't returned. And I think it's a real loss. And so I think that there should be more interchanges like the one that we had, the twinning that we had with the University of Vermont. I think that those sort of things, I'm looking at Geneviève Sommier right now, and I'm saying, talk to David about this and see if you can bring that program back.
Thank you. We'll just need to put you in charge, Jane. But okay, so we've got another question or comment from your colleague, René Provost. René.
Hi, Jane. It's great to see you and hear you. And I have to admit, I couldn't listen in to the first 30 minutes, so I missed the presentation of your entire career. So I apologize if I go over stuff that was talked about already, but I just wanted to comment on how arriving at McGill, it's a very disorienting place. And I think probably still is today. You arrive and there are these characters and they behave in ways that don't seem necessarily easily comprehensible. And within this strange new environment, you and Patrick were source of guidance, clarity, warmth that was really extraordinary, and that was transformative for us. And you may not realize, but over the years you've given me a certain number of Jane Glenn rules that I've kept and used to this day. And they go from the silent food rule, which is to tell students that it's okay to eat in class, but it has to be silent food. So you can't eat. So this, I thought that this was the crispy and smooshy rule that Joanne was talking about, but this is a different crispy rule. So no crispy food allowed in the classroom because it's disruptive. So it's okay to eat, stuff that doesn't crunch, so it doesn't bother other people. You once told me that sometimes you arrive to teach and you have this terrifying sense that you have no idea what you're talking about, and that you have to go in and there's just this blank. And you once told me, well, you could go in and say, I apologize, but I'm just not ready to teach today, and then just cancel class. And you once told me you could do that once in a year, but not twice. And this has always been a really comforting idea for me as I walk into school and have sometimes these kind of blank, terrifying feelings that, well, there is this option, the Jane Glenn option of, push the nuclear button and admit that you're really not ready to teach. And I don't think I ever did that, but it was very comforting to know that, there was this idea that I hadn't had by myself. Then when we arrived, you and Pat were the married couple on the faculty. And so this also provided guidance as to how to manage that. And there was the Jane and Pat Glenn rule that you pretend not to know each other at the faculty. And we've often had conversation about this, where you said that you and Pat just like wouldn't talk and they would look at each other. And you said sometimes students would have the impression that we were getting separated or something because we would, blatantly ignore each other as we walk by. And so that was another one. The concept of short sabbaticals, where, you take off right at the moment when classes end or grading ends and you just return just for the beginning of the next term. That's another Glenn concept that is, you pass down to us. And generally, I would say that you show such spirit of generosity in always, saying yes when, we would ask you something and the answer is pretty much is always yes. Maybe because you thought this job was such a piece of cake that, of course, you could add more things to it and there was, you get on it. But I think that this is a model that you passed on and that was a real gift for me and for the institution as well. So no question, Jane.
This is terribly embarrassing. I can feel myself blushing. I don't know if you can see the red face, and I think we've got to change the topic, really.
Except that the topic is you, Jane, so we can't really change it. But that was a nice list of rules as well as forms of inspiration and guidance.
Maybe I'll write them up and publish them and get something on my CV.
I think that would be a great idea. And I bet that Sandrine and Laura and I would be very happy to meet with you and write some of that down with you.
And Rene.
Well, yes, he's the source of, he's obviously been keeping a list of all the Jane Glenn rules, holding on to that wisdom. I wondered if in connection to some of the questions that people have asked and comments that they've made, I wondered if you could just briefly comment on the significance of being able to communicate and work in so many languages. Because the languages of the dialogue, we could have done this dialogue, interestingly, in one of 3 languages with the 3 people, with the 2 doctoral students and you. It could have been in English, which is what we did, could have been in French, and it could have been in Spanish. And then, of course, you gave us also insight in German. So I just wondered how important that was to you and also to this particular community where your career unfolded.
Well, I think that the different languages come from the fact that Pat did comparative law, and so that our sabbaticals were in different places. And so the Spanish, for example, was the result of a sabbatical in Mexico, Puebla, Mexico, and one of the offshoots of the sabbatical was our dog got ill in Mexico and had to be put down, and so we missed her so much that we decided to buy another dog, and it turned out to be it looked small when we bought it, but it turned out to be a Malamute. And so it became the only Spanish-speaking Mexican Malamute that, because we figured that since we brought her from Mexico, we had to speak her mother tongue. So, to her, and so she knew the word comer and échate and siéntate and so on and so forth. Now I've forgotten what the question is, so I think maybe we just better take that as the answer.
No, you managed to, it was all about languages. And so
yes,
give us a concrete example. Yeah. So let me just see if there's anybody else who would like to add, jump in with a question or comment. Yes, to Nandini, our manager. Nandini.
Hello, Jane.
Hi, Nandini.
This is Nandini. And I have fond memories of us. Whenever I went to Thompson House, you will have your salad and a cookie lunch. Do you remember?
Yes.
Okay, I remember it fondly, and I've joined you for many of a salad and a cookie. That was your routine lunch at Thompson House. And they still do that. They have a salad and a cookie. So I got to know you through these lunches at Thompson House and remember them fondly. So very nice to see you, and it's fantastic to have you with us today.
I still have, my lunch is now a bit of soup and a cookie.
There you go. You see, the rules just keep getting longer. Now we're turning to cuisine, Jane. So we can. All right. I'm going to take a last comment or question from our colleague Andrea Bjorklund. Andrea.
Jane, it's so nice to see you. One of the things you haven't mentioned is the farm.
Oh, yes.
And I just thought that I would, because Jane very kindly advised me and my husband when we were looking at buying a cottage in the Eastern Townships. And indeed, I could distill several Jane Glenn rules from that conversation, Renee, including the really remarkable attention which they paid to exit routes out of Montreal and why it was better to go east rather than, north. So I thought that was remarkable, but I wanted to just say hello, Jane, and also, well, thank you, because we have bought a cottage, which we are loving, and also to ask if you wanted to say a few words about the farm and the role the farm played in your, I guess, in your career and in your marriage.
Yeah. Well, La Ferme, because it was a French-speaking ferme, was very important to us, and we arranged our teaching load so that it was occupied for 4 times a week, 4 days a week, because I didn't teach on Monday and my husband didn't teach on Friday. They were our research days, so that my husband would go down Thursday night and he would have quiet time to do research. And then he had to have dinner ready. And the only thing he knew to cook, how to cook, was hamburgers. So now I still eat hamburgers every Friday night because that's what you eat on Friday nights. And then the kids and I would come down and so on, and we would spend the weekend together, and then they would drive off and I would have the Monday as my quiet time to do research. And the idea of carving out the quiet time to do research away from the faculty was really useful. If any of you can possibly manage to do that, I encourage you. It's just there's nobody to disturb you. You can't make up any excuses to go and talk to anybody. You just have to sit and talk to your computer.
Thank you, Jane. I think it's very apt that you finish off with some very direct advice to all of us and a direct recommendation. So I was thinking I'm in my office on the 3rd floor of Old Chancellor Day Hall hosting this today. And of course, this is just down the hall is exactly where we met almost 30 years ago. And so many of the things that colleagues have said resonate so clearly with me as well. And it's been very, very special to introduce you to Laura and Sandrine, to this next generation, these young doctoral students, figuring out their paths, thinking about the connections between the particular things that they are focused on in their thesis work and their broader interests and relationships and communities that will sustain and support them through their careers and lives. There's so many wonderful words and expressions that have come up over over this session, talking about how to hold on to confidence, the importance of gratitude, sense of humor, humility, integrity, hard work, and of course, aiming for being feisty with a smile. I think all of these things will, we will hold on to them from this very special encounter and conversation with you. And I am definitely going to share the crispy and mushy rules with my first year students as we talk about proximate cause next week. I think, of course, there aren't any crispy rules. That's the only problem. But I think, but that's lots that you talked about that I think people can borrow from and learn from and incorporate into their own careers. I should just add, as I conclude and say goodbye to everybody, and give Jane Friday afternoon off before hamburger night, that when Jane saw that the sub-theme for this particular dialogue in the Mothers-in-Law series was caring for our world, she said to me, where did that come from? I don't know. I can't talk about caring for our world. And so I reassured her, as you all would imagine, that of course she could talk about caring for her world, for our world, that her just talking about her own projects and her scholarship and her teaching in the areas of land use planning and agriculture, socio-economic rights, water rights, environment, all of this, of course, was caring for our world. But I think as we finish off today, there's another way in which Jane has obviously cared for our world and our world in a large sense. I think Stuart's question about ensuring and supporting connections between Canada and the countries around the world, other countries around the world through projects was particularly apt. But of course, Jane has also cared for and held up our little world here at McGill University, and in particular, the Faculty of Law, although I know land use planning also claims you, Jane. But I think as you heard today, Jane, we have all felt cared for and very, very fortunate to have and to be continuing to learn from you. So with that, let me thank Laura and Sandrine again and wish them the best with their ongoing work with their doctoral studies. Thank you to all of you for joining us for this last workshop. I think you all will join me in thanking Jane as our final mother-in-law and final intergenerational dialogue on women and human rights for this academic year. Happy St. Patrick's Day a day late, and happy spring. Of course, we mark the beginning of spring at the end of this weekend. So thank you again, Jane, and thanks to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Jane.